the Women's Health Initiative spent decades and enormous resources tracking postmenopausal women on a low-fat diet. And when researchers looked at dementia mortality, the diet did nothing, not a little, nothing. That finding just landed in the NAMS journal, and it's worth sitting with for a minute because a lot of us have been eating a certain way for a very long time based on advice that may not hold up the way we thought.
Hi there, I'm Tony Lee, and this is Hot Flasher, your daily menopause podcast that serves up fresh news, research, and wellness tips. I've built a daily news pipeline to find the latest on women's health and menopause research. Allow me to introduce my co-host, Nikki, who handles the headlines. Take it away, Nikki.
Thanks, Tony. We've got a good one to close out the week. I want to start somewhere a little different today. Not a study, not a supplement, a conversation. Dr. Mary Claire Harver's podcast Unpaused ran an episode recently with Dr. Hilary McBride, a psychologist and researcher whose work is focused on women's embodiment across the lifespan. And I keep thinking about the framing she uses. Menopause as a portal, not a breakdown, not a decline. A portal. Dr. McBride's lens is biopsychosocial, meaning she doesn't separate the biology from the culture, from the psychology. She looks at how the stories were handed about aging as women, stories about becoming invisible, about being past our prime, about bodies that are failing, actually shape what we experience, right down to the physical level. The narrative isn't just backdrop, it gets inside the body. That's not woo. There's a real literature on the nocebo effect, the way negative expectations can amplify symptom experience. And it maps onto what she's describing. Women in cultures where menopause is framed as a natural transition, even an elevation in status, consistently report fewer and milder symptoms than women in cultures where it's framed as loss and deterioration. That gap isn't explained by biology alone. What Dr. McBride is doing is asking women to examine the story they were handed and decide whether they want to keep it. And she's doing that with research behind her, not just optimism. I find this genuinely useful, especially on a Friday, because a lot of us came into perimenopause carrying a picture of what this was supposed to look like. And it was not a flattering picture. It was our mothers disappearing into hot flashes and silence. It was doctors handing out antidepressants without asking any real questions. It was a culture that treats midlife women as a category to be managed. That picture shapes what we expect, and what we expect shapes what we notice and how we interpret it. So there is something actually worth doing in pulling that picture apart and asking, does this have to be the story? The answer isn't that everything will be fine if you just think positively. Her work is more rigorous than that, but the psychological dimension of this transition is real and it deserves as much attention as the hormonal one. If you have been in a dark place about where you are in this transition, and a lot of women are, and that is entirely legitimate, Dr. McBride's work is worth finding. The unpaused episode is linked in the show notes. Okay, from the portal to the treadmill, more or less. A new cross-sectional study just published in the NAMS journal, Menopause, looked at cardiorespiratory fitness in perimenopausal and postmenopausal women and tracked how it related to cardiovascular disease, risk factors, menopause symptoms, and quality of life. The finding, higher cardiorespiratory fitness was independently associated with a better cardiometabolic profile, lower blood pressure, better lipid markers, healthier glucose metabolism. And this is the part worth flagging. Women with higher CRF reported fewer menopause-related symptoms. That connection between fitness and symptom burden is something the research has been circling for a while, and it keeps showing up. Not as a cure, not as a replacement for anything, but as a meaningful modifier of how this transition feels. There's a caveat worth naming though, because I don't want to oversell it. This is a cross-sectional study. That means it looked at a snapshot in time, not a before and after, not a randomized trial. So it can tell us that fit women in this sample had better cardiometabolic markers and fewer symptoms. It cannot tell us that getting fitter caused those outcomes. The association is real and it's consistent with a bigger body of evidence, but we're not in clinical trial territory here. The kind of evidence that would actually move a clinical guideline. The stuff your doctor would look at on a tool like open evidence requires more than cross-sectional data. What I'll say is this: the association is strong enough and consistent enough across multiple studies that it would be a mistake to wave it off. Cardiorespiratory fitness isn't just a gym metric. It tracks with how the heart and vascular system handle stress, how the body manages insulin, how inflammation runs, all systems that the menopause transition directly touches. So the overlap makes biological sense. There was one thing the study did not find, and it's interesting enough to mention. They didn't find a significant association between cardiorespiratory fitness and vascular function specifically. The researchers suggest that vascular health during the menopause transition may be driven by other factors, hormonal changes being the obvious candidate. So, fitness does a lot, but it doesn't do everything, and the vascular piece may require different interventions. For a practical Friday takeaway, if you have been wondering which kind of exercise to prioritize, and you're coming at this from a heart health angle, cardiorespiratory work, anything that raises your heart rate and keeps it there for a sustained period, has a specific evidence base here. That's not to say strength training isn't important. It is, and we've talked about it at length on this show. But the cardiac fitness piece is its own thing, and this study adds to the case for it. The last thing I want to talk about today is a finding that landed with a quiet thud in the research world this week, and I think it deserves a louder conversation. Researchers published a secondary analysis of the Women's Health Initiative dietary modification trial, which is, for context, one of the largest and longest running randomized trials involving postmenopausal women ever conducted. The question in this particular analysis: did a low-fat eating pattern reduce dementia mortality? The answer was no, not a little, not in some subgroups, no association. Women who followed a low-fat dietary intervention over the long follow-up period did not have lower dementia mortality than women who didn't. Now, before anyone takes this as license to eat whatever they want, that's not what this says, and that's not where the nutrition science lands overall. There's a meaningful difference between low-fat diet didn't reduce dementia mortality and diet doesn't matter for brain health. Those are not the same claim. What this does challenge is a pretty specific piece of dietary orthodoxy that has been handed to women for decades. Keep the fat down and you'll protect your brain. That logic was never as solid as it was presented. The relationship between dietary fat, cognition, and dementia is genuinely complicated. The type of fat matters enormously. There's a world of difference between the fat in olive oil and the fat in a fast food fryer. And a low-fat dietary pattern doesn't tell you what replaced the fat. If the answer is refined carbohydrates and sugar, you may have traded one problem for another. The Women's Health Initiative dietary modification arm was also a pretty blunt instrument. It wasn't a Mediterranean diet. It wasn't a precision nutrition protocol. It was a general instruction to reduce fat intake. So this finding doesn't indict nuanced dietary approaches that do have brain health evidence behind them. Things like higher omega-3 intake, reduced ultra-processed food consumption, the broader dietary patterns associated with cognitive resilience. It indicts the specific, somewhat reductive guidance that treating fat as the enemy is enough. My actual take on this: women over 45 deserve better nutrition guidance than eat less fat. The research on postmenopausal women specifically is still catching up to where it needs to be. There's a reason menopause researchers keep going back to the WHI data. It's because we don't have enough large, long-term trials that were designed with midlife women's outcomes in mind. From the start, this study is a corrective. It's also, honestly, a small prompt to revisit what you think you know about eating for brain health, because some of it was handed to you a long time ago, and the evidence has moved. Thanks so much for spending this week with us. If you're enjoying Hot Flasher, go ahead and hit subscribe wherever you listen. It's the easiest way to make sure Monday's episode is waiting for you when you want it. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you Monday.
That's our week. Thanks for listening to Hot Flasher. We'll be back on Monday. Have a great weekend, everyone.